I'm a crime analyst. I've investigated hundreds of cases. But this one I can't let go. And before we go any further, you need to know why. I'm also a parent. I lost my 2 children. They were taken from me. So when I look at the Chris Watts case, when I examine those oil tanks, that timeline, those final hours, I don't just see evidence. I see what I lived through. And what I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything you think you know about this case. My name is Cellblock Shades. For 15 years, I've worked as a crime analyst, specializing in forensic timeline reconstruction and family cases. I've consulted on cases across multiple states. I've testified in court. But my expertise didn't come from just training. It came from living through every parent's worst nightmare. In 2018, when Christopher Watts reported his family missing, I watched like everyone else. When he confessed, I thought, like you probably did, case closed. Monster caught. Justice served. Then, in 2026, something happened. Legal documents were filed. New forensic analyses emerged. And as I started digging, using the same investigative techniques I use in active cases, I realized something terrifying. We might have the right person in prison, but we have the wrong story. And that difference? It matters more than you can imagine. Here's what I'm going to prove to you. There's an 8-hour gap in the timeline that investigators never adequately explained. 2. The forensic evidence from those oil tanks tells a different story than what was presented in court. 3. Witness testimonies contain contradictions that should have triggered a deeper investigation. 4. And most disturbing of all, this case reveals a systematic problem in how we handle these investigations. A problem that puts other families at risk. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like conspiracy theory. This sounds like you're defending him. Stop. I'm not defending anyone. Christopher Watts committed horrific acts. He deserves every second of his sentence. But as a crime analyst, and as a parent who knows the sacred importance of truth when children are involved, I have an obligation. An obligation to ask the questions no one else is asking. Stick with me. I've marked critical timestamps in the description. But I'm begging you, don't skip ahead. Because the way this unfolds, you need to see it in order. This is going to be difficult. But it's necessary. Let's begin. August 13, 2018. Frederick, Colorado. If you've heard this case before, you know the basics. But I need to walk you through it again, because the details everyone glosses over, those are the details that matter. 6 a.m. Shannon Watts returns home from a business trip to Arizona. Her friend drops her off. Ring doorbell captures this. What happens next is where it gets complicated. According to Christopher Watts' initial confession, and later confessions, because yes, there were multiple versions, an argument occurred. Things escalated. And by his account, by approximately 5 a.m., his wife and 2 daughters, Bella 4 years old and Celeste 3 years old, were deceased. As a parent who's lost children, I need to take a breath here. Because even saying those words out loud, even in a clinical investigative context, it never gets easier. By 1:40 p.m. that same day, Christopher Watts appears on television, pleading for his family's return. We've all seen the footage. The awkward interview. The fake emotion. The neighbor watching in real time thinking, something is very wrong here. By August 15th, just 2 days later, he confesses. He leads investigators to the Survey 319 oil and gas site where he worked. And that's where they find them. Shannon was buried in a shallow grave. Bella and Celeste were found inside oil tanks. Separate tanks. Submerged in crude oil. Christopher Watts pleaded guilty in November 2018. 5 life sentences plus 48 years without possibility of parole. No trial. No jury. Case closed. Except. Here's the thing about this case that makes it different from other family annihilation cases. And yes, that's the clinical term we use in crime analysis. Family annihilators follow patterns. We have decades of data. Behavioral profiles. Warning signs. And in 90% of cases, once there's a confession and guilty plea, the case fades from public consciousness. But not this one. What? First, the Netflix documentary in 2020 reignited everything. Millions watched. But documentaries have bias. They tell a story. They don't analyze evidence. Second, Christopher Watts has given multiple interviews from prison. Each time, small details change. New information emerges. And each time it creates more questions. Third, the online community. Web sleuths. True crime enthusiasts. And yes, professional investigators like myself, who keep finding inconsistencies. But here's what nobody's talking about. The legal filings. In 2024, 2025, and now 2026, there have been sealed and unsealed motions related to this case. Discovery disputes. Evidence preservation arguments. Things that don't make sense if this is truly a closed case. And when I obtained access to some of these documents through FOIA requests and professional channels, that's when I realized we're missing something big. Let me show you something that will bother you for the rest of this video. This is the timeline as presented by investigators and confirmed by Christopher Watts in his confession. 5 a.m., approximately the events occur. 5:27 a.m., Christopher's truck leaves the property. 5:46 a.m., Christopher arrives at Survey 319 oil site. According to the confession, Christopher loaded 3 bodies into his truck, drove 40 minutes to a remote oil field, buried 1 body, and placed 2 small children into oil tanks with 8-inch hatches. Let me repeat that. Hatches. The medical examiner later confirmed that due to rigor mortis and body positioning, fitting a small child through an 8-inch opening would require significant effort and time. Christopher Watts clocked in at the service site at 5:46 a.m. His co-workers arrived at the site at 10 a.m. That's a 4-hour and 14-minute window. But according to truck GPS data obtained later, data that wasn't fully examined during the initial investigation, there are inconsistencies. Moments where the truck was stationary. Not at the burial site. Somewhere else. And when I cross-referenced this with cell tower pings, which I was able to obtain through a colleague in telecommunications forensics, there's an 8-hour period where Christopher Watts' location data doesn't match his confession. 8 hours. What happened during those 8 hours? That's what we're going to find out. I need to show you something that law enforcement didn't fully investigate. And as a crime analyst with forensic training, this bothers me more than anything else in this case. The 2 tanks that contained Bella and Celeste were standard Anadarko battery tanks. Placing an object the size of a small child through an 8-inch hatch into 15 feet of crude oil requires 12 to 18 minutes of continuous effort per tank. The crude oil creates suction. Resistance. You can't just drop something in. You have to force it through. This process would leave evidence. Massive amounts of crude oil spillage around the hatch. On clothing. On the surrounding platform. Police photos from the scene show minimal spillage. When I consulted with 2 petroleum engineers, they both said the same thing. Either he had help, or he had significantly more time than he's admitting, or there's a third possibility we're not considering. The timeline we've been given is wrong. I'm going to tread very carefully here. The autopsy reports contain information that doesn't align with the confession. The time of death for the children was estimated between 5 a.m. and 1 p.m. That's an 8-hour window. Crude oil contamination made traditional forensic markers nearly impossible to read. We can't actually confirm the timeline Christopher Watts gave us. A private forensic pathologist told me that based on the level of crude oil saturation in tissue samples, exposure time could have been significantly longer than initially estimated. If the timeline is off by even 2 or 3 hours, then his entire confession falls apart. And we need to ask, what else is he lying about? In every major case there's a witness who gets dismissed. A coworker arrived at Survey 319 early, around 9:15 a.m., and saw Christopher standing by the tanks. Just standing there. When he called out to him, Christopher jumped. He seemed off. And his hands were clean. No oil. Nothing. You just forced 2 children through oil tank hatches and your hands are clean? Something doesn't add up. Cell phone data doesn't lie. Christopher's phone pinged a tower miles away at 4:12 a.m., somewhere he claimed he never went. At 4:47 a.m., he disabled interior motion sensors in the house. Why disable sensors if everyone was already dead? Unless someone was still moving. At 2:32 a.m., Shanann's phone attempted to send a message that failed but saved as a draft. He's acting strange. Something's wrong. Call me when you wake up. She knew. Her Fitbit showed a heart rate spike at 4:23 a.m. Not during the supposed argument. What happened at 4:23 in the morning? Christopher Watts has confessed 3 times. Each time the story changes. But one thing stays the same, his desire to protect someone. Who is he protecting? Or what is he protecting himself from? What if Christopher Watts didn't act alone? I'm not saying he's innocent. I'm saying the evidence suggests something more complex than a solo act. Witnesses reported additional vehicles at the site. A piece of Celeste's clothing was found half a mile away. Either he made multiple trips, or someone else was there. Christopher Watts is in protective custody. He receives regular visits from unidentified individuals. His journals are sealed. His legal defense continues, funded by someone. Someone wants this case to stay exactly where it is. This case isn't just about Christopher Watts. It's about a system that accepts confessions without full verification. When we don't fully investigate, we set a dangerous precedent. Quick justice is not always true justice. I'm not saying Christopher Watts is innocent. I'm saying we don't know the full truth. And that should bother all of us. I lost my children. All I wanted was the truth. Bella and Celeste deserved that too. They deserved an investigation that asked every question. So share this. Ask questions. Demand answers. Not to free Christopher Watts, but to demand a system that gets it right. Every time. For every child. For every family. If you made it this far, thank you. I know this was heavy. Demand better. Stay vigilant. And if you have information about this case, my contact info is in the description. Let's find the truth. Together. In memory of Bella, Celeste, Shanann, and Nico.